Today on BRStv, we're going to start a new series on propagation. In this first episode, we're going to go over why this type of project is so attractive, set up some examples, and how to go about selling them. Propagation is more or less farming corals for fun and profit. Most corals can be broken off into smaller portions and grown into new colonies. If you maintain the right parameters, many of these corals will grow surprisingly fast, and there are ways to manipulate them to get them to grow much faster, which we'll cover in future episodes. One thing that's really incredible about all this is the impact it can have on the natural habitat these corals are found in. If we combined actively trading propagated corals with a dozen or two medium to larger operations in every major city, the demand for wild harvested corals would drop pretty dramatically, making the long-term viability of this hobby much stronger. There are really two ways to be profitable, which is trading and selling. Since buying new corals might be the single most expensive component of owning a reef tank in the long run, trading is a great way to reduce or eliminate that cost. I have one friend who does it just to cover the expenses of running his tank, like salt, food, bulbs, electricity, and replacement equipment. You can also make it a profitable endeavor by selling them to stores or directly to the public. This can be smaller scale just to make a few bucks, or something larger that could possibly be a job if done well. I will say jumping from hobby to business is difficult in any field, and this one deals with livestock, so it can be even harder. I suggest starting small and expanding upon that success as you figure out what works for you. I think one of the best reasons to get into propagation is because this is a hobby you enjoy. For me, setting up a tank and letting it grow out just isn't enough of a hobby. I need to be able to try new things, explore the possibilities, and learn something about the things I'm passionate about. However, this doesn't really chime in with my desires to have a long-term successful reef tank. I'm not willing to put a show tank through these constant changes or test new methods or systems on it, because one of them is bound to have some fairly negative results. If you're happy with the color and growth you have, there's no reason to mess with success. For me, there's too much time and money tied up in making these tanks look spectacular to risk many changes. A frag tank is a bit different. These are systems that beg to be tweaked and tested to maximize growth and color. The whole idea here is to find ways to produce the most attractive, fastest growing corals possible, almost like souping up a sports car. To me, this is where the hobby begins. We've all heard about zeovit, biopellets, vodka, various trace elements, foods like amino acids, carbohydrates, and tons of programs based off of a combination of these things. Even different types of lighting, bulbs, salt mixes, or tank temperatures are constantly debated. A propagation tank is a perfect way to test and explore all of these things without risking your main display tank. Setting up your first propagation tank is fairly simple. The demands are a bit different than most show tanks. Since this is supposed to be a profitable endeavor, we want to keep some of the ongoing costs down, like salt mix, electricity, and bulbs. For these reasons, most people select fairly shallow, wide tanks. Commercial operations are frequently done as shallow as 8 to 10 inches. 30-gallon breeders are a fairly common choice for a first attempt at propagation. However, this doesn't have to be done in an aquarium. It can be done in virtually any reef-safe container. Once you've tasted a bit of success, you'll probably want to start looking for something a bit larger and a bit more optimized for uses like this. For instance, our industry loans products from the hydroponics industry all the time because the requirements are often very similar: light, water, and nutrient control. The deeper versions of these hydroponic trays work excellent for fragging systems. The stands are a pretty good height as relates to working in the tank for prolonged periods of time. It's easy to see everything in the tank, and there's a tremendous amount of lateral area versus water volume. It's also mobile, hanging lights is easy, and because it's so compact and uniform, it isn't an eyesore wherever you choose to put it. Regardless of the type of tank you select, the needs are fairly similar to a standard tank, so you'll need some water flow, lighting, and a heater. Since we're dealing with a high surface to water volume ratio, there'll be more evaporation, and an auto top-off of some kind would be ideal. If you're planning on growing corals like zoanthids, green star polyps, xenia, mushrooms, ricordia, softies, or bubble tip anemones, none of these consume a significant amount of calcium or alkalinity, if any at all. So water changes are probably acceptable as your calcium and alkalinity solution. If you plan on growing SPS corals, there's going to be a very high ratio of growing corals to water volume, so calcium and alkalinity will have to be monitored closely. If you don't have a tremendous amount of corals in there, kalkwasser in your auto top-off might keep up with demand, especially considering the increased amount of evaporation. This will also keep the pH closer to 8.3, where it's theorized corals calcify faster. For the same reason, you'll want to keep a close eye on the pH so it doesn't get too high. Once you have the propagation tank filled with growing coral, you'll likely have to switch to two-part or a calcium reactor. There are upsides and downsides to both. Two-part is the cheapest and easiest to both implement as well as adjust as growth patterns and the volume of corals change. Downside is, depending on how much you add, it can raise the salinity quicker than it would in a standard tank, so you'll have to step up your water changes a bit and adjust for this. A calcium reactor has a benefit of looking cool and adding some trace elements. However, by its very nature, it's going to reduce the tank's pH. In a system like this, it might be difficult to add enough reactor effluent without lowering the tank's pH too much. They are also a bit more difficult to make precise adjustments when you sell half your corals or add a ton of new ones. However, adding a sump and increasing the system water volume can help with most of the issues related to two-part and calcium reactors, and highly recommended. A sump like this one can almost double the system water volume. While I don't typically recommend adding this type of complexity to a standard system for newer reefers, another solution is to use kalkwasser in your auto top-off and supplement it with two-part or a reactor. This will reduce the amount of salt added with two-part and raise the pH when combined with a calcium reactor. So once you've been successful, it's time to start selling or trading your corals. One of the best ways to trade them is to do a quick search and find your local reefing club's forum. Rather than just post what you have, make sure to include pictures or at least a link to a gallery of pictures. Also, resist the temptation to ask for offers. Post exactly what you're looking for, whether it be a dollar amount or specific corals in trade. Selling to a store can be a bit tricky. Since wholesale coral prices are fairly low and they most likely already have dependable suppliers, it can be hard to convince them to buy from you. If you have a fairly low volume operation, it's going to be oriented around price and their economic best interests. Asking to trade for corals might be an option as well. Maybe trade 20 of your frags for 5 or 6 new corals for yourself. Keep in mind, this won't be an even trade with a friend. Unlike trading within a reef club, this is an entity designed to make profits, pay employees, and feed their families. If you have a higher volume operation that can be a reliable, continual source, it's wise to take a different approach and price the corals much closer to standard wholesale. Then approach the stores with the following advantages. These corals were grown in an artificial, captive environment and proven to be healthy enough to not only survive, but also grow rapidly in these conditions. Your corals haven't been shipped around the world and been stored in multiple holding locations waiting to be sold. They came from your facility to them in less than 30 minutes, so they should have a small fraction of the mortality rate. If you're extremely picky about what goes in your system, you might be able to say, I keep my tanks pest-free, so I can guarantee no pests like aptasia, bubble algae, little red bugs, or acre-eating flatworms. And let them know you deliver, which means less wasted time at the airport and related shipping costs. You can also focus heavily about the marketable environmental benefits. If you're successful at getting into the store, get all this printed on some waterproof advertising material you can put on or next to the tank so customers also have a reason to buy your product over others in the store. Spend some time making it look nice so the store wants to display it. If the store isn't interested, don't let that deter you. Just stop by next month and act like it never happened. Show them what you have and remind them that you're still interested in supplying your product to them. Meanwhile, all that's really happening is you're building up your inventory for when you do get in. If all else fails and they refuse to even try your product 6 to 12 months later, offer them a huge sample for free, something any sane person can't say no to, if they're willing to put your selling points next to the tank. Once they see your product sells, they'll want to replenish it for sure. One of the more obvious choices is to try and sell direct via the internet. Honestly, I think this is something you should only consider after you've had success locally, and make sure it's done in a way that isn't in a conflict of interest with your current customers, which are the stores. For someone new, eBay might be the best way to enter the online market. There's a built-in trust and feedback mechanism there. Opening a new website is also an option, but this is a tremendous amount of work and can be very costly to produce something that looks competitive in the market. Lastly, there are two major online challenges here, and they're both related to shipping. First, there's a learning curve to shipping live critters. Second, you'll be at a major competitive disadvantage to the larger dealers in terms of cost to ship. Your FedEx or UPS discounts will be a tiny fraction as compared to theirs. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the comments area below, and we or one of the other viewers will share our thoughts. Next week, we'll be doing a quick demo on how to build your own softy and polyp frag system, including the complete assembly and all related equipment. So start jamming on that subscribe button to be notified when it's released. For everyone else, hang out and watch another video, like maybe this one on how to make or lose your first million growing rose bubble tip anemones. Thank you for watching BRStv.